For this final video, we're going to go through and we're actually going to make some modifications to allow us to do postbacks utilizing our collection. So to do this, we're actually going to need to modify our controller, and we're going to have two actions. One's a get and one's a post. So the first one will be a public action result from index, and this will be a list of user view model. That'll be our return type. We'll just say users. And we'll add an attribute that says this is an HTTP post. And we'll also go ahead and do a return view. We'll change that up in a little bit. So our get will be pretty straightforward. It's going to go and grab all users. We have that where component commented out. So we'll go ahead and say grab all users, and we convert them into a user view model, and then we return that collection. Flipping over to the view, I'm going to make some modifications here. We have a lot of these display fors, and I'd like to change them into text box fors. So I'm just going to do a quick kind of replace here. So instead of that, I'll do text. If you do dot, then we'll get the IntelliSense. So there's text box for. And the text box for takes the same type of expression. It's looking for a user view model being passed in, and then it's expecting what they call the T property. So what property are you mapping to this text box? And in our case, it's first name. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll replace all of these. We're not going to need this A tag anymore because it's a text box now. So we'll back out the A tag, and then they'll all be the same. Alright, so we'll save that, and we'll go ahead and run. And we'll see here now we have a table of text boxes. So for each one of those display fors, we now have a text box, and they're in a nice little table. So we'll go ahead and let me close that. And let's jump back here. Now we need to put a form tag around this, and we need to add a submit button to do all of that. So above here, above our table, we'll do an @using, and then we're going to use an HTML helper for begin form. And then we'll wrap the entire table in a using statement. Then at the bottom of our table, I'm going to do input type submit, and the value will be submit. So save that, and then we'll jump back to our page, refresh. So we now have our submit button, right click, view page source, and we'll also see that we have a form. Alright, now one of the things, and we'll right click actually and inspect element this time. One of the things I'd like you to take note of is the ID and name. You'll notice here that the name of this text box is uservm.firstname. If we click on the text box below that inspect element, you'll see that it is also called uservm.firstname. And the reason I bring that up is when it comes to postback bindings, and we're dealing with collections, the binding system doesn't realize that if there's two uservm.firstnames, that those are unique and independent, and that they should actually be treated as a collection. And because of that, we end up with getting basically a bad postback or a bad result from our postback. So let's kind of jump over here and see what happens. So if we flip back to Visual Studio, we'll run this side by side, and I'm going to go ahead and just put a breakpoint here on my return view. I'm going to hit submit. So our submit occurs, we catch it in the HTTP post action, and if we mouse over users here, we'll see that users is null. Now that seems a little weird. The reason is that Visual Studio, no, let me take that back, ASP.NET doesn't understand that these text boxes are actually treated as a collection or a group. And the reason for that is because we're treating them as individual objects. Let me tuck these out of the way here. By putting it in a for each loop, we've basically removed the collection aspects of our model. We've taken this model and we're basically ripping it apart and doing for each item, create a new variable called userVM. and that new variable becomes the name that's used during the model binding process. So to keep intact the fact that our model is a collection and that we want it to be treated as a collection even during the postback process, we actually need to not treat it as a for each loop, but rather as a for loop. So we'll take this variable out, and we're going to do a classic for loop. So it'll be int I equals 0, semicolon, I is less than model.length. And actually, it's a list, so it would be model.count, I plus plus. So that's what a typical for loop would look like. Now, inside of here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make this consistent. I'm going to call it x. So what we can say here now is because x represents the same thing as our model, which is a list, we can say one of two things. We can say model I dot first name. So we're referencing our model directly, the model property. This is, and model is this dot model, if you remember that. So we're saying model I, or we can say xi, because x is also our model, and that's our lambda expression variable. So we'll say xi, and that's why some people refer to this as the model item, because then they can say model item I last name. But by doing this array indices referencing, we're actually telling the model binding component, or the HTML helper, however you want to think of it, that these properties are part of a collection. So if we save it and run it, we get back the same results on our page, but if we right click and inspect element on that text box now, we'll see that that text box is now square bracket 0 dot first name. And if we flip back over here, we'll grab this text box and inspect its element, square bracket 1 dot first name. Now this TD tag, let me move this over here. This TD tag points to this text box, so that whole row is the same record. So if we expand those, you'll see that each one of those has the same square bracket 0 dot property name. This square bracket 0 is enough information for the binding engine within ASP.NET to know that all of these are one object together. All of these are one object together. So when it goes to reconstruct them, it will reconstruct them saying this is the item at position 0, position 1, and so forth through the rows. And each one of these rows has that same index. So now if we close this, go back to our controller, we still have our breakpoint in place, and I'm going to go ahead and write in here David and hit submit. So we've done our post back. We're back to our HTTP post. Mouse over users, and we'll see now that not only do we have something, but we have 6 of them, which is the same number of rows. We'll expand here. We'll see that we have 6 user view models. Start at the bottom. There's our John Doe. Second to last, Steve Jobs. And then in here, we have David Gantos. So in here, it's actually pulling the postback data. So we now have something that we can kind of index off of and work from to know what objects we're actually dealing with. So by using the for loop versus the for each loop, we actually end up with the results that we're looking for in our output HTML. So now our final few things that we need to do to finish up our app. So I want to be able to take those users when I submit, and I want to be able to actually capture those changes and save them back to the database. To do that, the first thing I need to do is I have to be able to actually get the row ID, which is not currently being stored inside of our view. We only have first name, last name, email, and password. So what I need to do is I need to add to my view model the ID, or primary key, that's coming from the database. So jumping into my user view model, stop my build, I'll do public int ID, and it'll be a get set. Next thing is for my home controller, I'm doing this select user view model. I need to add that property here. I need to map it. So ID equals dbu.id, comma. So now my user view model has that same ID. And then if I jump back to my view, I want to add it here inside of my row. Now within this row, I have all of these text boxes. I don't want to put the ID out there on the screen as a text box because people could edit it and change it, which would then cause things to get out of sync, and potentially I could write over an existing record. So instead what I'll do is inside of this TD tag, which contains a text box, I'm also going to do HTML dot hidden for, and I'll do X model I dot ID. And what that's going to do is it's going to generate an input hidden tag, and it's going to store the ID or primary key for this user in that field. So I'll go ahead and save. Move this over, do a rebuild, and this will now reload the page. So we have the same output on the screen, but if I right click on this text box and inspect element, we'll see there is my input, index 0.firstname. The type is text, value is Kevin. That's what we see in the text box. Above it now, we have input. There's a whole bunch of these other data dash elements, and I'll cover those in a later lecture, but that has to do with field validation. And what we're looking for is name 0.id. So for item 0, the ID value is 1. And that's coming right from our database. So we'll go ahead and close that. So now if we jump back to our home controller and we hit submit here, we look at our users, expand that first user. Now we have email, first name, ID, last name, and password. So from here we can now do an update to our database. So we'll go ahead and stop that. So now within our HTTP post, we're going to go ahead and we'll start out with a module 6 DB context. So create a new context, and then we're going to loop through each one of our users. So for each user view model, we'll call it a UVM, user view model, in users. So we're going to loop through each one of those users that was sent back to us, and we're basically going to go through and grab those users and update them. So the first thing we'll do is get user from database, and this will be the matching user. So we'll say that this is a user, and I'll call it a DB user, and we'll say context.users.first or default. And we'll say this is DBU. Remember DBU from earlier? So this will be that one item from the user database. And what first or default does is it's like a where statement where it says go grab all of the users where their DB, so DBU is that user, .id, so where their ID equals UVM, user view model, .id. So grab the users from the database where their ID matches the one user view model that I'm currently looking at. So I'm looping through the user view models. I have one user, which is the UVM. I want to find the matching database user, and I'm doing it by ID. And I only want one user back, or none if they don't exist. So what this is assuming is that there's either one or no users that are in the database that match the user from the view model postback. So once I grab that user, I will then go ahead and say dbuser.firstname equals uvm.firstname, and I'm now copying the values between the objects. So dbuser.password equals uvm.password. And you'll notice that I'm not copying the ID because I really don't want to modify or update, and actually I can't because it's the identity field. So I'm making those changes. So now once I'm done, I can go back to my context and I just simply tell it to save changes. Because I'm doing updates, I just say save changes. So those changes are now saved. And then instead of returning the view, I'm going to return a redirect to action. And I'm just going to redirect back to myself. That'll cause the browser to do a get, and it'll re-execute this code, posting those updates. So we'll go ahead and run that. So here's our screen again. So I'll go ahead and say David, and we'll split screen Visual Studio in Google Chrome. I'll put a breakpoint here, and we can kind of walk through the first one and see what happens. So go ahead and hit submit. A context is created. We have our users view models. First one there is David. So we'll go ahead and we'll walk through, do a step over, start the loop, and then we're going to go and grab that user from the database. So DB user now has the user, Kevin, from the database with an ID of 1. UVM is the postback data, which also has an ID of 1, but the first name is now David. So we'll copy those values from the user view model into the database user, stepping through. So now our database user carries the new name of David. So we'll take these breakpoints out. We'll hit continue. We hit save changes. Those changes are committed. And then we redirect back to the get action, which will reload the page. So we now have updated records. If I come back here and I hit enter, I'm going to do a full page reload. The full page reload also shows us David. If I come to my Server Explorer and I right click on my table and show table data, we'll also see that in the database it now says David. So those changes that were made here are actually getting committed back to the database. Now, if you watch the previous video, I think that's the problem we ran into here is I touched the database and caused that to happen. So if I close connection here, go ahead and continue, we're going to get an error. I'm going to back up and let me make sure my connection to my database is still closed. I'll hit submit again, and hopefully that will work without a lock. So there's David Jones. If I come back into here, I'll right click, reconnecting the database, opening it, and there's David Jones. So make sure that connection is closed while we're in run. And that is how you would manage a collection and be able to post back multiple changes back to a database.